What's up? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy.
Hey, Danny.
Hey, Randy. This is episode 36, and today we're going to talk about should I give up?
Yes.
Which is you know, why did you want to talk about this today?
I think this is something that I consider all the time because like oftentimes we get into things and we have so much enthusiasm and then the enthusiasm wears off and then we're stuck doing it and then we're like, because the goal is so far off still and then the enthusiasm is gone and you're stuck in the middle and then all the time there's just like, uh, should I give up? And that
Oh,
kind of thing.
okay. Yeah, that makes more sense now too. I get what you're saying too, because after when you get that initial rush is over, you're stuck in the middle now. Sucks,
Mm-hmm.
and you still have a
Yeah.
long time. Yeah, and then I guess on the flip side of that too, I think you know there are times when it is appropriate. I think to give up. I think there's times when like something just isn't right for you. It's not a right fit, and maybe it is a question worth asking. I ask myself that too, actually, kind of a lot as well.
Yeah, and it's a culturally hot topic because in this culture that we have of side hustles and working hard and everything, it's almost you're not allowed to give up. If you give up, you're a quitter. No quitters allowed.
Yeah,
No pain, no gain.
yeah. You're just being a baby and a bitch, and
Exactly.
not
Suck it
not just
up.
sticking with it through everything. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I mean, when you talk about side hustles too, which we talked about in the last quick fix, if you're working full time and you're trying to manage multiple side hustles, you know, I think that question probably should come up sometimes because whether or not you're actually doing things that are working for you rather than just sticking with it arbitrarily just to see that it hopefully plays out in it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So I think
That
that,
makes sense.
like this question oftentimes comes up and it's a difficult one to answer because it really when you ask that question, should I give up? You're in a different place, both mentally and physically, than when you committed to doing the thing that you started doing. You know,
I feel like
like
that when I ask
like in
any question.
America,
Yeah.
half the marriages end in divorce, and people think, should I give up on this marriage? They're at a completely different mental place and also different physically than where they were when they committed to marriage. And so it's a hard question to answer because you're trying to answer that from a very subjective place when maybe it's not meant to be a subjective question.
No, you know what? And to your point, I'm glad you brought that up because the should I get up give up question is not just about work. It's about anything we are involved in, relationships, whatever. And I think we talked about that when we talked about, when we mentioned relationships before about the necessity of sometimes walking away from things, right? Sometimes it's not worth staying into. You do give up. And I think one of the problems too, especially like with like marriages or with like when you were saying, about starting something and have that initial enthusiasm, we also have this expectation that that enthusiasm or that, like what do they call it? The honeymoon phase or whatever, right? In relationships. Yeah. That should persist or we look back to it as like the high point of the relationship or of the endeavor. And we think the whole endeavor should be like that. And it would be awesome if it was or were, but the reality is that's never seems to be the case. I mean, might as well just say that. I don't know anybody where that seems to be true. Because, like, even if, like, I remember, I mean, I've done research projects myself. I've ran into colleagues who've been doing research projects that they absolutely love. But there is always a point where you hit a plateau or something, and that shit gets tedious and
Mm-hmm.
drawn out. And then the end starts to get sort of like, it like where it might have been like, okay, we're gonna be done in 2 months. All of a sudden, it's like, oh shit, this is gonna go on for fucking 2 years. Do I really want to keep doing this? It's gonna occupy this much time, because something changed or something happened. And so I think that's true, right? We're dealing with constant change. We're dealing with different people. We're dealing with different circumstances. A different, we are different. So when is it appropriate? And when is it?
I
When do
think
you think it's appropriate to even ask this question? I guess we should also.
so. I think that when the question comes up, it's appropriate because it means you actually have to look at things. But I also think it's important not to change anything while you're in that same spot. So like I look back to stuff that I've done because I have an aversion to quitting because when I was young I used to quit very easily. And so now and And I always look at myself as a quitter back then, even though I was quitting stuff that I didn't want to do. I'm still like, you shouldn't have quit. What's wrong with you? So, but so now I still get to those points, and what I do is I observe that it's a legitimate question. Should I quit? But then I keep on going for like weeks or months, because you know how like we talk about how you always, like, whenever you're in a bad mood, you feel like you need to fix your life. And I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
that's usually when I'm asking these questions. When I'm in a bad mood, when things aren't going well, that's when I ask, should I quit this? So I persist beyond that point of being in a bad mood or being whatever, and then I take the action if necessary.
That makes sense. You know, it's funny. You were just talking about being young and quitting. It just crossed my mind because I know you were an Eagle Scout. I think I made it through like 3 meetings of the really tiny scouts.
Yeah, the
What are they
tiger
called? The
cubs.
Cubs or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I was like, no, I'm out of here. I don't want to do this. But
yeah.
that's yeah, no, I like that idea though. So even I think even sometimes too, I think it's even worthwhile, when that question comes up, to examine why you feel that way. Try and even like create a list of what is it about now that's changed that really makes you feel like this is no longer worthwhile. And then maybe setting yourself a date saying, okay, these are the things I don't like about this now, or these are the things that have changed. How about I stick with it for another 3 weeks, and then I'll come back to this list. If everything on this list remains the same, I'm out. If not, then maybe it's worthwhile pushing forward or changing. Because, like again, that's the other, it's always challenging too when you talk about quitting, especially I think when you get older and you realize, that when you stick with stuff, the skills you gain and everything, and the possibilities, for something new, you never know when that's going to come up. Like you never know when you're doing something that excitement's going to come back, or you're gonna finally get over that plateau and the next stage. It's hard. It's like exercising. You always hit a plateau, right? And it's a bitch. And like if you have to put in more effort usually to get through it. So is it a case of you need more effort or more energy, or is it a case where you need to pull back? I mean, this is the challenge though, is how do you sort of approach these two? I think it's always difficult.
Yeah, it's really difficult to know when you're going to get to that reward, because it's like once you get the reward, then you don't really need to do it anymore. Like you're working so hard to get this reward, but you never know when the reward's going to come. It's like the picture of the miner who quit like right before he got to the diamonds or the gold, and it's just like, had he have hit one more time, the riches would have gone open, but he never knew because he didn't hit that one more time. But how are you supposed to know when that one time is? You just got to keep on
Yeah, he
going
could
until,
also
yeah.
he could also hit one more time indefinitely, and there'd be no vein there, right? There's nothing. There's going to be no payoff. And I think this is what's so fucking hard about human life.
Mm-hmm.
Even about knowing ourselves too, is like even knowing our limits and stuff, because we always want to do more, we always want to do better. And then like trying to understand a situation, we can't predict the future, we can't predict what's going to happen. So you're always stuck with now and trying to best balance in now, knowing what you know. I mean, it's like making an informed decision, right? You have the information you have to make the best decision you can. But if you bail out early, it could turn into something or it could not. So you're always running this risk.
Well, here's a way. So let's look at it kind of like a stoic and an existentialist way of looking at it. So I
All
can tell
right.
from like a stoic way of looking at it, they would say, like, what would a person of this character do? Because it's about character and virtues, and so
Yeah,
would that person push forward or would that person change direction?
I like that. And I think with that too, you could even add like, I think they would want to know too why you feel that way would be important, because are you reacting to something, or are you letting yourself kind of be pushed or pulled by something beyond your control or outside of you, rather than making the choice yourself? And is it important to you? Is it important to you know what you're doing, like especially if you're talking about like maybe a relationship or like a career path or something, like is it something that matters to you, and is there value in that anyway? Maybe might be important too. Or how does it help other people as well, might be important in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you kind of have to
So what would
weigh
you
both
think there in
sides of it.
terms of how would you respond to that? And then in terms of character, what do you think that would how would
So
that tell you?
like whenever I think of Stoics, I tend to think of them as very character driven people, like they would want someone who's committed and someone who's decisive and someone who's stalwart. I don't know how you pronounce that word, but
Whatever, just
someone
go ahead.
like
I'm not gonna.
chooses a direction and sticks with it. And so
Yeah, yeah.
uh I think that if they were asking, would this person stick with it, by asking, would a person of this character stick with it, it would give them more of an objective point of view, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I feel like this isn't getting me anywhere. You'll be able to look at, yes, but does a person of the character that I want to be do this? And then you'll be able to say objectively yes or no.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, right? Where, you know, oftentimes, and I think people forget this, really in almost any, you know, any philosophy that has to do with like self-development, living a good life, you want to have some sort of objective stance as much as you can with human beings as possible, right? Because otherwise everything is too subjective. And the difficulty with that is then your own emotions, your own thought in that moment can really dictate what you're doing. So I like that. I think that would help a lot, right? Which is, instead of asking, should I do this, asking, is the person I want to be someone who would do this, or someone who would stick with this? And I think that's a good way to look at it, because it kind of takes you outside of yourself slightly for the question, which might help answer it in an actually meaningful way.
And plus, then whatever direction you choose to go, that direction is in the direction of the person you want to be.
Yeah,
Not
which
just
means you're,
yeah,
yeah.
not just
Oh,
subject
yeah.
to somebody who is subject to a temporary emotion or something like that.
Yeah, then you're actually reflecting on, what is the good life, what's the good person, and you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is using reason, right? And actually thinking this stuff through, thinking about who you want to be and the kind of person you want to work towards, and making it happen. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good idea. It's funny. I think the existentialists, I think you could approach this from a lot of different ways depending on how you look at it. But I think, to make it a little bit easier, I guess, to talk about, I think.
I like it. I like it. Life is meaningless. It doesn't matter. Just do something.
Yeah, well, that there is, it's funny though. I always think there is that side of existentialism, which is, the when they say like life is meaningless and we create meaning, it's all about then us, right? It's all about what the individual's doing. It's all about authenticity. So in a certain sense, you can answer the question however the hell you really want, because what you're doing doesn't matter. So then you have to kind of flip the question around and ask yourself, well, is this right for me? So is this in line with my authentic self? Is this in line with effectively, who I want, who I am, or who I am working to be in being a better person? Because they also recognize, there's going to be suffering, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be difficulties. But just like the Stoics, the existentialists also ask us to reinterpret those things as beneficial, right? Seeing those things as a way to build character, or to realize ourselves in the world, to know ourselves, to figure out what we're capable of overcoming. I think, in really difficult situations, when we ask, should I do this? Whether we're talking existentialist or stoicism, I think both philosophies would probably recommend to us that we also ask ourselves, like, um, is this kind of right for me, in the sense that, do I value this? Is the struggle worth sticking through? Because I might say I don't want to do this anymore, just because in a sense I'm being lazy, right? Or like I'm just kind of jaded or tired with something, or I'm in a bad mood. And none of those are good reasons necessarily. And if I push through it, I overcome that dilemma in my life, and I realize I can get through it. We talked about that before. Like, I think you've mentioned a ton of times, like, when you look back at all the things you've done, all the obstacles you've overcome, that helps you face a new situation, because look, I overcame all this shit. I can do this. I just got to keep going, right? I just got to look at this suffering not as suffering, but as an opportunity. Or I need to look at this challenge not as an obstacle and a roadblock that can't be overcome, but as something that's a challenge, something I should sort of embrace to sort of realize myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's helpful to kind of write down reasons. And this is something that I definitely don't do often enough. But when
Oh,
take
yeah. I wish
well,
I did.
the times when I do it is when I know I'm done with something and I don't ever want to turn back. Like, I've done it in some relationships I've been in where I'm just like, I'm done and I don't want to ever turn back. Some some places that I've been where I never want to go back. I just have lists of reasons why I never want to go back there. So then in the future, when so like I had to do this when a very significant relationship ended because I knew it wasn't what I wanted, but I knew that when I was by myself and feeling down, I was going to want back to those like good feelings from the relationship.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
writing down a list of why it's over, why this is it. That was very helpful. And I think similarly, when we're in a time of having enthusiasm and starting something new, it would be very beneficial to write down all the reasons why this is it and why we should push forward past the pain.
Yeah, I like that because it's like no, I think in both cases, right, you have, with the relationship thing, you clearly had made up your mind. So it's something you don't want to find yourself back in incidentally or accidentally because you had a bad day or whatever, right? So I think that's a great idea. I think, I don't know why I was thinking of a legal pad. I think because movies always do that with the pros and con list, right? Don't they? Isn't that like that
Yeah.
was like a thing for a while or something? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking of, legal pad. But anyway, besides the point, I just keep drifting. Yeah. So I think that's a good idea, right? Writing down like, okay, this is why this is something I'm not doing. And even if you do make a decision like not to do something, that's a great point to write down. These are my reasons. This is my justification. I can always return to it and look at it. And everything can be changed. It's true, but I think that's a great way to remind yourself. And likewise, right, when we start something and we're excited about it, and I do this actually all the time. When I'm working on a project that I find difficult, I actually, when I started, I do always write down why I'm excited about it. And I try to write down not only why I'm just excited about sort of the topic or the project broadly, like, oh, this will be great because maybe I'll make money or maybe, it'll lead to other opportunities or whatever. I actually try to write down some of the things that I think will be hard about it, but will be good for me. And those are usually the ones that are tricky because they're usually the ones that I can go back to that will help me stick with it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're more so than even like I think this will lead to other opportunities, or I think maybe I'll get another job from it. It's actually usually those that help me get through the struggle. Like, oh yeah, right. I knew this challenge was going to come up, or I knew I was going to hit a roadblock here, but I just gotta keep going and get through it. And I think that is a really helpful way to do it. I wish I did like a pros and cons more. It's easy to forget in the moment, but
Yeah.
when you're excited about something, but I think it is. It's a really good practice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think probably one of the most important things is although it's important to consider should you give up, it's never appropriate to give up when you're asking that question. Because
Why do you think that?
it seems like it always comes up when things get difficult. And usually things get difficult right before you're about to have a big breakthrough. You know?
Okay, yeah, that makes, so you're saying like, yeah, not to, when you ask yourself this question, when it comes up, don't just abandon it.
Mm-hmm.
Because then but that's also too, I think that's a good point too, right? Because if you just do walk away, you're probably not thinking it through, or you're probably not like ready for, I mean, it's one thing, like, what was I was listening to a podcast today, which was just like stories, and they were talking about this one kid, they were true stories. This kid got this job and he like went in and it was like totally different than he thought. And he was way in over his head. And it was talking about when he was younger and he just walked away. And it's like, that's one situation where like, he literally couldn't do it. It was a mistake. Right. And like, so walking away probably was appropriate for him at that time because there was no way. It actually it was a job for interpretation and they hired him and it was the wrong dialect.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
couldn't understand him. Right. So it's like, what are you going to do? That makes sense. But I think in situations where we're already doing something, we probably can do it. We probably can complete it. We just, for whatever reason, either I think it's also important to ask too, what else is going on in our lives that's maybe influencing this question or causing us to ask it? Because I find a lot of times too, like when I ask that question, it's not the thing I'm working on that's a problem. It's other stresses or other things that maybe are making it harder to do than it was before, or maybe getting in the way of progress, or maybe whatever, and I think it's important to kind of look at the whole life too, because it's so easy to look at our lives, I think, as these very like puzzle pieces stuck together or something, and we'll examine one puzzle piece really carefully but forget that the whole picture requires the puzzle. right? Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't have no idea.
Hmm.
But anyway, but yeah, so like we forget that it's like a whole life, not just this little, like not just this project. It's not
Hmm.
just this relationship. It's not just this. It's everything. And I think we have to consider that when we're making these decisions.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's trying to get everything to line up all together that can be the difficult thing. I've been struggling with that recently. It's like I'll
Oh
get
yeah.
this thing working and that thing is not, and then I'll get that thing working and this thing is not, and then I'll get these two working, but this isn't working. And oh, yeah.
Dude, I struggle with it all the time. And you know what I say? I mean, I know personally, one of my big problems is that when I get excited about something, I'll throw everything into it. But then what invariably will happen is you start ignoring other things, right? Because you're not paying attention to your whole life. And I have to, if I usually I'm better at it now, I can recognize it a little bit quickly. I can recognize it, faster, to sort of tone down my excitement and spread my time out over my responsibilities in a more healthy way, right? Rather than just dumping everything in all at once. But I think a lot of us do that, right? We start something new, we're like, yeah, this is awesome. And we just put all of our time. And then we forget about our relationship. We forget about, friends. We forget about, our other jobs or whatever the hell we're doing. And like, it can cause significant problems and then create situations where we ask this question of whether or not I should give up, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
whether I should quit something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huh. So what was going to be the subtitle of this? The cost of persistence? Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The cost of persistence.
Yeah, because here's the thing, like
I mean, it
nowadays
sounds
there's
right.
yeah, well nowadays there's such this thing for like grit, like you just have to stick with it. The only reason you don't have everything you want in your life is because you're just not sticking with it enough. If you would be a better person if you just stuck with it more. And it's like, yeah, that's good, but maybe it's not always true.
Well, it's funny what I liked about the episode title and that subtitle, and what I don't like about that mentality is I think it has a tendency to sort of make people think they just should never change. And that is a terrible idea. I
Mhm.
think it is definitely appropriate at times to walk away from things. There are things you should. I mean, especially too, like if you realize, like, here we've been kind of talking about more or less things that we decided to do, things that, we had made choices about and taken on ourselves. But when you're in situations where like, you're in a career that's not right for you, or you're living a life that's not right for you, a lot of times the only way forward is to walk away. And sometimes, unfortunately, you have to walk away in a kind of a big way to make the changes you need to start sort of course correcting, right? To get to where you want to be. And I
Mhm.
think
I
that
just
is
want to
hard.
add
I
the
mean, it's
caveat that you're not talking about suicide, and if anybody's thinking about that,
no,
call
no,
the
no, no,
suicide
not at
prevention
all.
hotline.
No, not walking away in this strict determinate final sense,
Right,
but
because that would be
walking
one of
away
those
in the
cases
sense
where
of,
you don't give up and you start
yeah.
contacting other people.
Well, no, it's funny. I think even in this case too, what I'm talking about is not what I'm talking about walking away from a life that's incorrect for you, but also really having the courage to then try and create a life that's right for you, and that is hard. And I think that mentality that we're sold all this time, they're like, oh, you're just not working hard enough. You're just not putting in enough effort. That's why it's not working out. That can derail people from living the life they really want, because they feel like they're stuck in this thing that if they just worked harder, it would pay off. But that's not always true.
Mhm.
It's not always going to do that.
Sometimes you just have to try a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I think that nowadays, I've encountered so many people who think that they're completely lost in their life and they don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, what have you tried to do? And they're like, this one job. And I'm like, literally,
Yeah.
there's hundreds, if not thousands, of potential jobs out there. Like there's tons of things that you could be doing, and like I think sometimes you just have to try enough stuff. Like for instance, little story down my life. I started out unknowingly,
Memory lane.
yeah, memory lane. Unknowingly, I started out as a computer programmer, and I hated it. Okay. It was because in order to study physics, we had to learn computer programming. I got a job. I was working in the basement with a bunch of fat old men who hated their lives, and I hated it. And so,
It's funny how when people around you hate their lives, that sort of rubs off.
right?
in a job, especially, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And it was a bunch of fat old men, and I didn't want to be a fat old man who hated his life.
Yeah.
I wanted to like spend my time outdoors and spend my time with lots of women. So like, I changed. I went and I did veterinary medicine, and then I did start like SEO companies and YouTube and all this different stuff. Long story short, now I'm going back to teaching myself computer programming because it turns out that I do actually like computer programming. I just don't like being a fat man in a basement who hates his life.
Yeah, and well, it's funny. I think it's a great point because I think, when you look at, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. When you look at like how specialized everything is now, you could be in the right field, just in the wrong subfield. Like it's totally possible.
You could just be
And if you
working for
don't
the
look
wrong
around,
company.
yeah, literally. I mean, that's the funny thing. Like it's nowadays, I think it's almost like there's so many options that it's overwhelming for how to live, right? Because, there's what is it? Like, Mill and a lot of philosophers point this out that, like we need examples of how to live to choose our own life, right? So we need to be able to look in society and see, oh, there's a lot of other people like me living like this. So I could live in any of those ways. All I got to do is do those things, right? But now it's like there's so many examples that it's like almost overwhelming.
And it's nearly impossible because you're supposed to choose what you want to do for the rest of your life before you have any life experience, and then you have to get committed to it with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt. It's like,
Yeah.
this is the most messed up system that's been around
Yeah,
forever.
it is. What's funny too about that whole system is like, honestly, nowadays too, the value of an undergraduate degree has plummeted so much in terms of its real value.
It's worthless.
And also it doesn't even matter what you get it in anyway. It's arbitrary. You go get another degree if you really want to. But like, I think people, that was the worst idea ever. Like, we live to the average age of what, like 80 or something. So you should decide what you want to do when you're 18. That makes no sense.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like spend
it
from
should
when
be
you're
when you're like
18 till
30.
30 just messing up and figuring out exactly what you want to go. Like,
Yeah.
go sail around the world, go, work at a shoe store, go do all this different stuff. And then eventually you'll have an idea like, you know what? I was pretty good at that. I enjoy doing that. Now I know what I want to do.
Well, what I like about this is kind of what you're saying is being persistent in trying to find what's right for you, but not letting yourself get caught up in any one of those things as if it's an end in itself. And I think that's important because I think, we when we're told to make this decision when we're 18 to choose something, it's presented to us as if it's final. And I think that is the worst system in the world because it's not
It was
even remotely.
terrible for me because I didn't know what I
Yeah.
wanted to do. And they're like, well, choose something. And I'm like,
Dude, I had
oh,
no clue.
this
Yeah.
is awesome. I need to direct the rest of my life being how I don't know what I want. This is awesome.
By
Yeah.
effectively rolling the dice.
Yeah. And
Because
then
it's funny
and
too,
then it was
because they also say, oh, go ahead.
it was like twice as bad because I looked at these people who knew what they wanted to do, and I felt like something was wrong with me that I was 18 and I didn't know yet what I wanted to do.
It's funny though. I think a lot, not all of them. I think some people do for somehow know what the hell they want to do. But I think a lot of the people that seem to know what they want to do in college are also being directed by others, living
Mhm.
vicariously through them.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that is true. But yeah, it's funny. I remember that too. And it's like the funny thing too, coming from high school, having no life experiences and trying to make that decision, it is the most fucking uninformed decision in the world. It's like rolling dice and just fucking seeing what major it lands on and being like, okay. I don't know what any of these are really. I know what the sciences are, but I don't know what working in science entails.
Dude,
Nor do I understand the difference between being a physicist and a bio. You know what I mean? Like, it's like all those things that matter. Like,
and the crazy thing is in terms of work experience, we were probably some of the most like well-versed people in
yeah,
terms of work experience because we both had jobs outside of high school for most of high school. So we've been working all the way through it.
I had 2 jobs in college too. I mean, I worked a ton when I was younger.
But
Yeah, yeah.
it's just not enough to actually give you the direction you need.
Well, what it is too, though. I think people underestimate too. We live a long time, and I think it's also just like maturity and stuff too. You don't know yourself when you're fucking. You don't know yourself coming out of high school.
Mm.
I felt like I really started to know myself. It was like my late 20s, early 30s that I really maybe started to feel like I knew myself. And I think people, what do they? I think they say the brain doesn't mature till 28. I'm pretty positive that's the number. And I think if you just think of that idea, it's like that's 10, you're working with an immature brain. You're working with, high risk brain basically. So it doesn't make any sense to ask this. Yeah, I think that's important. Try a lot of things. Not be afraid to walk away when your focus is really on finding what's right for you in those early stages. I think that's important. And just, trial and error, unfortunately, is the way to find our right life. I think that's, how it's always going to be.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
here's actually another thing that I just thought of when you were saying that is actually look back at past experiences to see your judgment in walking away and see if that was actually good or bad. Because that was an experience that was somewhat eye-opening for me. I was actually talking with like a therapist once about how I was just like berating myself because I was like, I'm such a quitter. Like I quit being a programmer and then I went and became a veterinarian and had hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt and so like I was and and she was like, well, was being a programmer a good decision for you? Did you enjoy doing that? And I was like, no, I hated it. It was terrible. And she's like, well, you quit, but that was good for you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. I guess so. So kind of looking
No,
back
I
at,
think
yeah,
no, no, go ahead.
seeing when quitting was actually beneficial in your life, and if you were good at making those decisions, and how that compares to the decisions you have to make now.
No, I think that's a good point too. And what you're pointing out is really important, which is if the decision's right for you, it doesn't matter. And that's where that whole persistence thing comes in, right? That's where that whole like this whole like this whole mentality now to persevere through everything, or you're a quitter and a loser, can really get in the way. That mindset. I think you need to shift that mindset to like persevere and don't quit on yourself.
Mm.
Not It doesn't matter what you're doing. And I think that's the really existential attitude, right? Is nothing out there matters. like at all. It basically, one way I always think of when I think of existentialism is if you look around the world, everything's a zero. The numbers come from here. You have to apply the numbers yourself. So it doesn't matter what you do. You can make anything valuable. You can make anything a one, right? All you have to do is say, hey, that's a one because it works for me. So you just have to, I think it's focusing and not giving up on yourself, but being willing to give up on things that you're doing because they're not right for you. That is crucial. That is essential. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point because we I think at least me personally, I can't speak for other people, but I get stuck in thinking that I have to persist with that thing instead of because like if I keep doing that thing that I don't like and I persist at doing that, then yes, I'm persisting. But if I stop doing that thing and then switch focus to something I'm better at or something that's more in line with what I'm supposed to be, that's also persisting, but that's probably persisting in a more skillful manner.
Yeah, right. It's like smart and healthy because you're thinking about what's right for you, not just the task that you're doing. And I think but this is not, I don't want to, we shouldn't oversimplify it, I guess, either, because sometimes there are situations where like, I recognize it, like, okay, if I persist through this, it is hard, but I will get something valuable out of it for me. And I think that's always kind of the question we should be asking ourselves too, is like, what is, what is the relationship of whatever I'm talking about to me? Whether it's a relationship, a project, a task, is it defining me? Is it valuable for me? Is it healthy for me? Is it providing me security? What is the main relationship that I share with it? And why does it seem like something I should keep doing? And why is that important for me? I think always this question about, because I think at the end of the day, our self development and self realization is the most important thing. So I think working through these questions, and they're not easy. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, I guess, but nothing in life is easy. We know that, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
we know it. It doesn't mean I pay attention to it all the time, but
It doesn't mean I don't want it to be otherwise. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Oh God. Yeah,
Yeah.
what a dumb system, right? Give us consciousness, but not know who the fuck we are. So stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It makes life interesting.
It does, right?
Yep.
Here, you're blank. You have to figure everything out. Good luck.
Mhm. Yeah. So let's see.
Everybody else
So
is gonna tell you stuff.
yeah, right. So for people who are struggling with this, should I give up? Like maybe they have some type of thing in front of them and they're contemplating giving up, or what type of advice would you have for them? We've covered a lot of topics, but
Yeah.
if you had to like distill it down to a couple minutes, or a couple ideas, and I'll think of what I would say to them as well.
Okay. I would, well, I guess, okay. So I guess I would say, kind of going back to what I was just saying, I think if you're struggling with this question of should I give up, I think the principal question to ask yourself is, like, who are you trying to become? In the sense of what type of person are you trying to become? What type of character? What type of life do you want to live? Do you know these questions? Can you answer these questions in any way? And what's the relationship between what you're doing, the task that you're talking about, or the relationship with that set of questions or ideas? Because that can help give you some direction, like whether or not persisting through it is valuable or worthwhile at this moment because you think you'll get more out of it, or whether you're just going down the wrong path and you need to shift course. I mean, these are hard questions. They're not easy. I also think, don't rush into an answer. Literally, like if you feel like you're stuck or you're asking yourself, should I quit this? You've already been doing it. So there's no reason to stop at this second. Does
Yeah,
that make sense? Like
yeah,
we always have time. We don't think we do, but we always do. And I think it's worth sometimes, like you said earlier in the episode, just waiting, like saying to yourself, look, making a list. Here's why I think this question came up now, but I'm still going to stick it out for 3 weeks. And then I'm going to come back to this list in 3 weeks and ask myself, does this still hold? And then maybe that's a good way to assess it. You're giving yourself time to walk away from it and think about it carefully. And then kind of with my first one too, I think, we focus so much on the projects and the things we're doing as if they're external to us and forget about the whole life, and we forget about ourselves, the person. And I think that's really the more important thing, is we should be working on ourselves. The other stuff matters insofar as it relates to us and our sort of like authentic realization or self-expression. So I think we need to stop looking at these things as things to do just for the sake of doing, and start thinking about them as, are they valuable for myself, for my life, for who I want to become? I think that's the more critical question. That's a few things, maybe.
yeah. That's a
Yeah.
good one. I want to come back. I want to touch back on that. But when you were talking there about saying like don't give up now, what popped into my mind was that actually that's such a great answer, because when you're asking should I give up, you don't actually know the answer yet. So you should stick with it longer, because
Yeah.
then you'll actually know that you should give up, and then you give up. Like it makes a lot of sense. And I've done it in some things in my life where I've stuck with it until I'm like, I definitely need out of this thing.
Yeah.
So like I think that's actually really good advice to stick
Well,
with
the
it
reason why,
longer.
yeah, the reason why I thought about it too is like, I mean, I found so many times in my life, I know you have too. I know for a fact you have, where you're doing something and you enjoy it, but like you're not getting it's not resulting in what you hoped. But then all of a sudden, like a week or two later, some opportunity crops up because of it or related to it, that had you not been doing it, that wouldn't have happened. And so I think there is that sort of important relationship where you have to consider, like, this is everything I'm doing is interrelated, right? So I might get other options or opportunities, and things might work out well, so you should keep doing it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, one mindset that I've been just kind of harnessing recently is thinking the universe has got this. Like the universe has got this. Like I worry less about these things because I'm like, don't worry, the universe has got it. It's got it all figured out. And so that's been nice, because it's kind of like I may not see it now, but I know it's all figured out.
I like that too, though, because it's kind of like it's relieving yourself of the pressure of worrying about shit that really just doesn't make. I mean, it's so beyond your scope anyway. It doesn't matter, right? Like, we're not controlling chance and stuff, so we can't dictate that. So it's just like, yeah, the
Mhm.
universe will figure it out. What's right, it's like that's like when people say, if it works out, it's right for you, right? Like if it works out, it's right for you. The universe aligned with what you wanted, then you're good. You don't have to worry
Mhm.
about it. If not, then it wasn't right for you. Move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back to what you were saying about it's being like a puzzle and you have to focus on yourself. So this is something that I sometimes struggle with, because it's like I know that I'm this whole collection of everything going on, but it's like I'm doing this and this and this and this, and they're very clearly distinct things. They're not related at all. And so it's kind of like, and this thing is causing me trouble right now, and I just want to cut that out, because I cut that out, and then everything else will be fine. And
I think
Can
Well,
you
I think
can
no,
you elaborate on just like focusing on yourself and kind of
yeah.
how
I
to
mean,
do
no,
that when we're going through the
I'm glad
struggle?
I'm glad you brought that up too. Yeah, because I mean, I wasn't articulating myself very clearly earlier either. But yeah, no, when I guess I think about this a lot, like when it's so easy, and I think we're taught to look at everything as separate. Like I have, like think about like when you're younger, right? I have school, so I have a block of time with school. Then I might do extracurricular things, or I might have a job, or and then I have my family, I have my friendships. All these things we think about as if they're these separate sort of things that we have to designate time to, and that in designating time to, we build them each independently. But that's not true because you're present in every single one of them. So no matter how you look at it, you're bringing yourself and you're bringing all the baggage from all those other relationships to every single thing that you do, positive or negative. And I think, so when you think of it that way, when this question comes up of should I give up, you should also be expanding your sort of thinking to what else is going on in my life. Is, for instance, like I found in my past, and years ago, I remember I was having trouble at work, and it took me about a week to realize that it wasn't trouble at work. I was having problems in my relationship. That stress was starting to cause me to become like unfocused, and I was losing. I felt like I was falling a little behind in work, but it wasn't because necessarily the work was hard. It wasn't because I couldn't do it, nor was it because I didn't like what I was doing. It was because I was kind of unhappy with something else in my life that was starting to bleed over into that, right? And I think when you look at your life that way, you can also start to kind of ask yourself healthy questions like, do I have friendships that are, or do I have relationships that are really negative or toxic for me? Are they getting in the way of my moving forward? Are they getting in the way of me being the person that I want to be? Or do I have a side hustle that just isn't working and it's like I should be doing something else? Or is it an indication that I should totally change the way I'm, what I'm doing entirely? I think it's trying to sort of think of ourselves as present in all of these things. We're not a different person, if that makes sense, right? So everything we do, everything we are is the culmination of all this other stuff. We have to look at it, I think, holistically to make a kind of good decision or an informed decision.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So the answer is no.
But what was the question?
Should I give up?
Oh
Actually,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think I was just thinking about it because
no,
I mean you made a really good point there. And I think that the actual answer, should you give up, is no, because the answer is
yeah.
always you should persist in becoming more of yourself. So if you do
Yeah,
that, you're never giving up. You may just
you
be
should. Yeah,
giving up
I
something.
like that. Yeah, exactly. You're giving up something that at the time is arbitrary to yourself. I think we should, if we reframe the question of should I give up on myself, never give up on yourself.
Never. That's
Those
good.
other things, they don't matter as much. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Hey, we answered the question.
I know, that's great. And that's the
Wow.
episode.
All right. All right. Did you want to add anything? You good?
No, I think that's a great place to end it. We just answered
That was
that
a good place to
question.
end. We did. That's done. That's awesome. Look at
Mhm.
that. All right. So,
One of the great philosophical questions of all times we just answered in less than an hour. You're welcome.
should I give up? No. But you have to listen to the whole thing to know why. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you guys liked the episode number 36. Should I give up? If you're listening to this please check us out on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, please check us out on, one of the podcast things that you can download from. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends, get it out there. We really enjoy doing it. We hope you guys get some value from it. We'll be coming back midweek with another quick fix. So check that out. A short little episode where we give you guys tips for one sort of self-help topic. Until then, though, I'm Danny, my buddy Randy.
Later, Danny.
Later, Randy.